Hey guys, and welcome to the Barrel Age Faith. Today I have Father Patrick Cardine joining us to talk about his experience with the translation of Saint Raphael of Brooklyn's Relics. So it's going to be a fun, exciting episode. Also going to be talking about what are relics? Why does the church have them? What's the big deal? So we'll be talking about that in today's episode too. Father Patrick, how you doing today?
I'm sorry there, Kyle. Are you there? Can you hear
I'm
me?
here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I had your other YouTube channel up by accident, and it was playing in the background, so I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Already hit a technical difficulty. Like I'm an old dinosaur. I'm stuck in the 18th century, so forgive me for that. No, this is great. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. Was an extraordinary experience. I mean, really, probably once in a lifetime experience, and I'm so grateful and humbled to have been able to be there for this amazing event. So,
Wonderful. So we'll talk about your experience there, which was just a couple weeks ago. But first, I want to talk about who is Saint Raphael, the saint, the person. What did he do in America? How did he have a unique role in bringing Orthodoxy to America?
sure, yeah, I'll go through a just a real brief or somewhat brief outline of his life to give us a bit of a background because he is an extraordinary saint, and he is particularly beloved in the Antiochian Archdiocese and the OCA too, because he worked with the Russians and the Antiochians. And I think hearing his life a little bit will just make the event of the translation of his relics and his glorification, and some of the some of his ongoing interaction with us, even to this day, which is what's really important as well. It'll make it more poignant for us to know a little bit about him. So I'm going to just kind of give you a brief biography of him. He was born in 1860, and he died in 1915. So he died young at the age of 55 of heart failure. He basically worked himself to death. And as you're going to see, in a sense, that was almost his charism, like his work ethic, his faithfulness, his devotedness, which was extraordinary. And for a priest like myself or the other priests, I know that the priests study his life and ask for his intercessions. This is one of the things that is most important to them, just his faithfulness and his dedication and his work ethic. And I know for myself, uh, this challenges me, convicts me really a lot. And one of the driving forces in my own life is thinking about my judgment before Christ and Him asking for return on the talents He gave me. This scripture, this parable haunts me pretty much on a daily basis. It's really what drives me to work hard, as you know. And I am a lazy priest, but I do try and work hard as well. And I want to give Him back, two or three times what He gave me. That's what I want to do. So Saint Raphael epitomizes this really. So anyway, so he's born in 1860, and he really is referred to as the shepherd of the lost sheep of America, and truly embodied the ideal of a shepherd in imitation of Christ. He really was a shepherd who laid down his life. I mean, quite literally, he probably worked himself to death in that sense. His parents were from Damascus in Syria, but while his mother was pregnant, there was a tremendous persecution there in Damascus in Syria, so they had to flee to Beirut, Lebanon. So he was actually born in Beirut, Lebanon, but they returned back to Damascus about a year later, even though he was born in Lebanon and baptized there. He was very bright, and this was recognized even from his first, education as a young child in school. Everybody recognized how bright he was. He had tremendous, intellectual abilities, and as he went through his whole young education, he was smart. He was competent. As I said, he worked hard. All of these sort of qualities and virtues in his personality create a lot of opportunities for him. Like he sort of had like a golden touch in a sense, but it was really because of his virtue. Doors just opened up. He was noticed by patriarchs and important people that invited him to participate and do things. So his parents and family were very poor, and at one point he was going to have to be yanked out of school because couldn't afford it. And so his name was put forward, and he was actually received a special scholarship from the patriarch to continue going to school, which was a big deal. At the age of 17, he was so notable that he was made a teacher's assistant, and at the age of 19, he was tonsured a monk by the patriarch and made the patriarch's personal assistant. About this time, well, a lot earlier, in 1840, the seminary in Bellemond there had been shut down, and so there was nowhere for him to continue his education. So the Patriarch of Constantinople invited the Patriarch of Antioch because of this, because they didn't have any place for them to be getting higher education. He said, choose one deserving student to study at the School of Theology in Halki, which is on an island off the coast of Turkey. And so St. Raphael was chosen by the Patriarch to go and to receive the scholarship and study there. He was ordained at the age of 25, which is the youngest age you can be canonically ordained as a deacon. And he had been there in Constantinople at the school studying for about 5 years. He went back home to Syria in 1886 and went back to work for the Patriarch as his assistant, and he actually was his preacher. So when the Patriarch was not able to preach or to teach, St. Raphael stepped in and preached for him. He had a thirst for continuing his education. He wasn't satisfied. He wanted to better himself. And so he asked if he could go to a theological academy in Kiev. At the time, this was still in Russia. And he was given permission. Reluctantly, the Patriarch didn't want to let him go, for good reason, but he let him go to Kiev. And while he was there, there's a sort of like the different national churches would sort of have, diplomat or ambassador churches in various countries. So there was an Antioch, a church of Antioch there in Russia and in Moscow, and he was made sort of the ambassador or the head pastor of that church, and represented the Antiochian Patriarchate in Russia. He was ordained also at this time as a priest with permission from his Antiochian Patriarchate, and he was also raised to the rank of an archimandrite at the same time, about a month later after he was made a priest. So the next sort of period in his life were rather turbulent years and controversial, and this is, I think, an important sort of part of his story to mention. Again, I'm just going over things very quickly here. You can read more detail if you'd like, but it's important to know something about him and what kind of a person he was. The Greeks had held the Patriarchate in Antioch for a long time. This is a bit of a sore spot for the natives, the Arabs in that country. And the current Patriarch was going to take a position. He was resigning and taking a position as Jerusalem's Patriarchate. So it was opening up. And St. Raphael was really anxious about using this opportunity to try and get an Arab and national person from that country into that role. And so he really set about on a campaign. He wrote, he contacted people. He was really working very hard to try and make this happen. He even wrote under a pseudonym at some point, but it didn't happen, okay? So there was another Greek, Spiridon, who took the position of the Patriarch in Antioch, and St. Raphael actually opposed him and denounced this on some level, and he got himself into some trouble. He was actually suspended, and he was in Russia at the time. He's suspended, and he's continuing to write articles and write against all this. Anyway, it was a bit of a mess, but he held strong convictions about things, and he wasn't afraid to challenge, what he felt was wrong and what was not, being done properly. His absolute fidelity and faithfulness and loyalty was to Christ and his church, and not necessarily to just an ethnic identity or anything like that. So he fought against Philitism and all kinds of things. He sort of really fought for purity in the church. Anyway, he was later convinced. The patriarch contacted a friend of his in Russia and said, "Would you please talk to Father Raphael and try and convince him to offer an apology so we can get him back reinstated and back on board? We need him." So he did. His friend convinced him. He apologized. He was reinstated, but he was sort of sent out to the backside of nowhere and to teach in Kazan at an academy there. While he's there teaching, this is where really the big shift in his whole life took place. It was here where it seemed like he was about to launch into the ministry that God had been preparing him for since he was very young. And in 1895, he gets a letter from a doctor, a Syrian doctor, who was writing from New York City. And he was writing on behalf of this Arab society in New York. They had heard about St. Raphael, and they were in desperate need for pastoral, priestly, clerical oversight in America. They just didn't have that. And so they heard about him, and they said, "Please come to us. We need you in America. Come, help us and minister us. Come be our pastor." So he receives this. Really, this must have made a tremendous impression upon him. Like, I don't really know if there's a story, a detailed story, but he received this kind of like the Macedonian call when St. Paul has the vision of the Macedonian who said, Paul was going to be going this direction, and the Macedonian says, "No, we need you over here." Mm-hmm. And Paul took this as, a prophetic word from the Lord to go and minister to these people. And St. Raphael took this letter in a very similar way. I also think, of course, of St. Patrick, who was called back to the Irish with a similar kind of vision. So this call back, not back, he had never been there. His call to America really was, I think, the watershed event of his life. You could sort of divide everything up, everything that went before and everything went back, but after this one event of him coming to America. And he's going to spend the last 20 years of his life now ministering in America. So he arrives in America in 1895, and he had brought some stuff with him from Russia. And within 2 weeks in Manhattan in New York, he sets up a small little chapel in a house. I think it was in an apartment. It's dedicated to St. Nicholas, and eventually it moves to Brooklyn. And then it moves one more time in Brooklyn, and where our current Cathedral of St. Nicholas is for the Antiochian Archdiocese. And he starts offering services, the liturgy. He starts teaching and preaching, but pretty quickly he hears about. He gets letters and notes and these indications that there are small communities of Orthodox Christians scattered all over America, and they don't have a priest, they don't have a pastor, and they're in dire need. They've actually started to sort of like wander off and get involved in other traditions. And he's very concerned about this, and his heart really is struck by the great need of these sort of wandering sheep. That's why we talk about him as being the shepherd of the wandering sheep in America.
He has some letters, right, that are addressed to even Orthodox Anglican relations in the United States.
Yeah,
he was dealing with some of his flock going to these places, correct?
He does, and he was concerned about that. I mean, he was very willing and ironic and friendly with the Anglicans and others, but at the same time, he was very stringent about, like, there is a demarcation here, to be Orthodox in communion with the Orthodox Church. For him, had a very definite, concrete reality to it, and he was concerned about the Orthodox Christians in America that were sort of slipping into these other communions, and that was a great concern for him. So he decides that he's going to take a missionary journey, and this is what he's kind of really known for. I mean, a few other things, but these journeys that he took were extraordinary. So in 1896, he embarks on his first missionary journey across the United States. And everywhere he goes, he's like searching for Orthodox Christians. He stops and asks people, "Do you know of anybody an Orthodox Christian, and maybe they're like, I don't even know what that is. Then he'd give them a list of names. Well, do they have a last name like this or this or this? And he's searching out and trying to find them wherever he can. So he pretty much travels from New York to San Francisco in this first trip. And, you know, you got to remember, this is the 1800s. A trip like this is going to be very arduous, and he's very poor. And he makes 30 stops on his way from New York to San Francisco. He goes to cities, small towns. He visits people in their homes. He goes out to isolated farms, which, you know, there's no train to the farm. He's got to walk. I mean, God knows how many, you know, hundreds of miles he walked, not just on this journey, but all the journeys that he took, trying to find these people. And he just exhibited an amazing sort of tirelessness to seek out and find them. There's, you know, stories about this, him staying up all night just to go and find people and then minister to them, to celebrate the divine liturgy that they haven't had for years and years, and baptize them and marry them and hear their confessions. And there's one story, he sought this community out. It took him a long time to find them in the middle of the night. He was there till like 3 a.m. and barely got back to his hotel before he had to catch the train to his next stop. So this is kind of what his journey was like. That was his first journey. Then in 1898, he takes another journey, another major journey. And in 1899, he takes a third journey. And that third journey, I think he visited 43 towns and cities along the way. He also spent 7 months traveling in the various regions in the U.S., mostly on the East Coast and a little bit down south and in the Midwest. And he's ministering not just to Arabs, but Arabs, Greeks, Russians. He had a heart for everyone. And he really, you know, he wasn't restricted to, you know, just the Arab or Antiochian national jurisdiction. And part of this goes to his going to Russia too. So he spent a lot of time in Russia, and he was there on behalf, technically he was there on behalf of the Russians, because he had been released to the Moscow Patriarchate at one point. In 1902, he takes another journey. It's probably his most ambitious journey. He goes to Cuba and Mexico. So this is really kind of a hallmark of his life, and it's very inspiring, I think, this dedication, his personal sacrifice to all of us. But I think as a priest, I find it particularly convicting and inspiring. I know sometimes I complain. You know, we all complain. Well, normally what I do is I complain for about 30 minutes, and then, like the old Jewish lady, I end by saying, "But I don't complain," you know. Or sometimes right before I'm about to complain, I say, "I'm not complaining, but we shouldn't be complaining. We should be rejoicing that God has counted us worthy to do His work and to do it with great joy." There's stories about him traveling on donkeys, on horses, horseback, taking boats, ships on the coast, trains. He walked a ton. At any rate, he left a great legacy in America through these trips.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, if you're ever feeling too lazy, we'll get you a donkey and you can ride it from city to city.
I've always wanted a donkey, actually.
Yeah, well, there you go. You know, I'm warmed by his story because it definitely shows kind of a Catholicity, like his own ministry of being, you know, working for the Patriarch of Constantinople and Antioch and working with Russia and then coming to the United States.
Yeah.
It really does show this kind of collaboration at a global level to, you know, further the mission, even if there's tension within that. And so I think we can learn a lot from his life in that regard, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And that was a hallmark. And he spoke to that. He spoke about how he had, you know, I can't remember the exact quote. It's probably his most famous quote. You know, he had a Russian soul and a Slavic this and a U.S. citizenship and a Syrian birth. He spoke about that sort of global Catholicity of his own, within his own person. It's like he embodied it, just like you said. And this was very important to him, and he talked about it. So in 1903, he was elected. He had actually been asked to come back and be a bishop on numerous occasions, and he continually turned them down. He said, "No, I've got work here to do. I can't come back there and be a bishop. God's called me here. I've got work to do." But in 1903, he was elected to be the Bishop of Brooklyn, And in 1904, he became the first Orthodox bishop consecrated on American soil, which is a big deal. And he was consecrated there in St. Nicholas Cathedral in Brooklyn. In 1905, he consecrated the first Orthodox seminary, or monastery, I'm sorry, the first Orthodox monastery in the United States, St. Tikhon's in Pennsylvania. So he continues his pastoral ministry for another 10 years. And just a couple things to note. One of the hallmarks of his ministry was the emphasis of English use language in the liturgy and in education. He was very concerned about the Orthodox in America. They were going to be growing up here, they were being educated here, and he thought it was very important to enculturate that way with the language. And he was concerned about their education. He always cared a lot about education. Another little anecdotal story, in 1911, he was honored with a silver icon for all of his ministry in America. And he was confused by this. Actually, his response was he didn't understand why he should be honored for doing his duty. It's like, well, why are you honoring me? I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So he always sort of thought of himself in that way, that he was really just an unworthy servant. So he worked and worked and worked. In 1912, he fell ill. He was starting to get weakened by his labors. I think he had some heart problems, but he recovered. And in 1914, he went on another cross-country trip, another major trip. He also visited Canada on that trip. And then by 1915, he was back home. He fell ill again, and he passed away, died from heart failure. So that's when he died, 1915, 55 years old. His legacy, he built over at least 30 plus churches. We still have his churches are still with us today. They're functioning, they're live, and they have this whole legacy of having been founded by St. Raphael. There were over 25,000 faithful from his ministry. He published prayer books in English, the first English prayer book, big deal. He established the Word magazine, and as I said, he really emphasized a lot with the education of the young people and catechesis. There's stories about him sort of arbitrating between factions within various communities. He would come and sort of adjudicate and bring peace and harmony, and so there's a lot of stories like that in his ministry in that way. But as you said, I think one of the primary things is he embodied this Catholicity of the faith, and really didn't exist in any kind of an ethnic ghetto or mentality. And he suffered for this. He really did suffer. His willingness to kind of speak out, take some risks in this way, and he suffered for it. He was so at the end he was buried, I think, Mount Olivet Cemetery in New York. Originally, he was buried in New York, but his body was taken to Antiochian Village in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, in 1988, and he was formally recognized and as a saint, glorified. His beatification was in the year 2000, and he's commemorated in the Antiochian Archdiocese on the first Saturday in November, because the synaxis of St. Raphael and the saints, the Holy Archangels, is on November 8th. So some of his relics, getting now to the point of my experience up there not that long ago.
Yeah, which was what, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, July 18th.
You went up to the Antiochian Village, and
so that's another feast day now. So on our calendar now, as of this, just a couple weeks ago, the translation of the Relics of St. Raphael is a new feast day on July 18th. And they had collected some of his relics earlier, and there was reports of some incorruption that he was incorrupt. But Metropolitan Saba decided that they wanted to take all of his relics out of the vault where he was buried. And whenever we go up to the village for various clergy things and retreats and stuff, we generally always go up to his grave and say prayers. Um, but they wanted to exhume his body. Metropolitan Soviet decided to exhume his body and take the remainder of his relics from the vault to the St. Ignatius Chapel. Yeah, that on the screen is some of his vestments. And so they took the relics to St. Ignatius Chapel there at Antiochian Village. So I was able to go up with one of my subdeacons, Owen. Two of us drove up. It's about a 4-hour drive, and we were so excited. We got up early on that Thursday, the 18th of July, and we drove up there. And when we got there, they had just opened the vault, and there was a report. I wasn't there when this happened. There was a report that there had been a sweet, perfumed fragrance that emanated from the vault when they took the lid off. And for those that haven't experienced this, it's actually not as rare. It's somewhat rare, but it's not as rare as you might think. I have experienced this on many occasions, actually, of smelling this amazing fragrance from the relics of saints. So we spent several hours, and there were priests there, sort of pulling everything out of the vault, taking the bones. Now, there were four other people in the vault with him. There were 2 bishops, I believe, and 2 priests, and he was in a casket. They were not. So it was clear who was who for the most part, but the casket had yeah, this was there was a little bit of humor to this part of it. But the casket had disintegrated a bit. The vault had not been sealed very well, and so water had gotten in, and the casket had somewhat disintegrated. But it took a long time to gently and slowly, respectfully remove all of the bones from the others that were there. And after they were out, they were able to identify the casket and get the parts of the casket off. And this was a very exciting moment because we weren't quite sure what we were going to find there in the vault, and we weren't even quite sure who's who. We were pretty sure, like, there's one person in the casket and there's 4 other people outside of the casket in this concrete vault. But when we got the vault cover off, his vestments were there, and we had pictures of him in these vestments. And the director of the cemetery there at Antiochian Village had been there when they first put him in that vault. He was the only person on site who had been there, actually. But they opened the casket, and he saw St. Raphael's body when they interred him there in the vault. And so he was very helpful. But the great moment came, we were all waiting for. We're like, we think this is him, right? But they pulled a cross out that was there in the casket around the bones of this person, and they brought it to Metropolitan Sovereign, and they were cleaning it and trying to, and it has his name on it, so it was his cross, and everybody just breathed a sigh, like this was really a special special moment, because this is Saint Raphael for sure, 100%. And they actually found the bones where they had taken relics from years earlier, because they had taken some relics from him years earlier, and they found those same bones were right there. So it was another absolute confirmation, and all of his vestments were there as well. So that was very exciting. So at that point, they started bringing out his relics and laying them in a different place, all together. And his teeth, his jawbone, the skull, and just his vertebrae, his ribs. I mean, all of the bones there, we're pulling them out. And of course, there was, like I said, the vault water had gotten in. And so things were pretty soiled and kind of muddy. And so we set out some basins to wash the bones. So at some point in this picture, you can see right there, there's some of the washing going on. And you can see we took our cassocks off, those that were getting things out, because it was pretty muddy. But the Metropolitan took the skull and the jawbone and a couple other of the bones that had been prepared. You can see there. And they went ahead and processed with that to St. Ignatius Chapel. And there were a lot of kids from the camp were there, and you can see there the procession, and they're on their way up to the chapel. But there was a lot more of his bones, and there they are in the chapel doing the service and venerating the relics. There were a lot more of his bones. The bulk of his bones were still back at the graveside. So I just decided to stay back there, and because there was a lot of work to be done. And so I missed out on this, but actually it was a great privilege because I got to personally wash probably 80 or 90% of his bones myself, because there were 3 or 4 of us there, and just handling all of the relics and the bones of St. Raphael was just a remarkable experience. I can tell you firsthand, I held them, I handled them, I was cleaning them very gingerly. There was a lot of skin left on these bones, which is remarkable. And the only reason why they probably weren't in better shape was because of the water that had gotten into the vault, and deteriorated things. But I didn't even really know what to make of the whole thing. It was just kind of a very moving and humbling experience to go through that. And I think it's something that will certainly stick with me for the rest of my life. That I counted a great privilege to have been part of that.
Mm,
So
that's wonderful.
yeah, so I'm very, very grateful. And that's kind of I think that's the gist of the story in terms of how that all went. And you know yeah, he's when you have an experience like this with a saint, you talk about people talk about how they develop a devotion to a saint, right? You hear that sometimes. And it usually happens because you have some kind of an encounter with that saint. And I know that's how it's happened in my life. I mean, we serve a lot of masses at St. Patrick's, a lot. So we have a pretty robust liturgical schedule. And a lot of these masses are celebrating feasts of saints. And we might celebrate a feast of a saint, and maybe I didn't really feel any personal connection to that saint or whatever. But I can tell you how many times we have been celebrating the feast of a saint where I felt like the presence of that saint there, or there was some kind of a connection that was made. And it's really been life-changing. I mean, I think when I became Orthodox, it pains me, it grieves me when some people are coming to Orthodoxy, and the one thing that becomes the major stumbling block for them is the saints, our relationship to the saints, or our Blessed Mother. It pains me because for me, this was probably the greatest gift or experience that I had in coming to Orthodoxy. It enriched my life with Christ in a way that's almost indescribable. And it's just it's sad when that becomes the thing that people can't get past, and what they're missing out on. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. I want to say something about that a little bit more, but I had a couple stories to tell.
Yeah, okay, before we get to talking about the theology behind relics and our relationship with the saints, you got a few
Yeah, I
stories
have
on Saint
a few
Raphael.
anecdotal stories to tell, and these are personal stories. So this is stuff that happened personally with Saint Raphael. So there was a gal that came to our church years ago. She showed up in a wheelchair. She had suffered greatly in many ways in her life, to the point that her faith had been really shaken, and somebody brought her, and just by God's grace, somehow she stuck around, right? And we began to develop a relationship, and she began to get interested in Orthodoxy, and her faith started to come back to life within her, even though she had suffered. I mean, she was a ballerina, she danced. But she had found herself in a wheelchair inexplicably, and So her faith started to come alive, and she started to really want to become Orthodox, and she went through catechism. And so we were in that process, and it was a beautiful thing. Um, and out of the blue, I mean, this was just complete sort of, nobody would have anticipated anything like this. But she tells this story. She was in her room and she was just doing some mundane, banal thing. I don't know what she was doing, cleaning or taking care of something, and she started being flooded with thoughts, like out of nowhere. And the thought, what was a thought? It was a word, a single word. It was Raphael, Raphael, Raphael. It just kept coming at her. It was just like wouldn't stop. And she had no idea what this meant or where this was coming from, but it was so powerful she couldn't deny something was happening. And so she didn't even know who Raphael was. She had no idea about Raphael the Archangel. She didn't grow up with that tradition or anything. She didn't really know about Saint Raphael at that time. She knew that Raphael meant God is my healer. And so she was like, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm suffering greatly. And I keep hearing Raphael. Does God want to heal me? Well, what's going on here? So over the next few days and weeks, she kept having these experiences, just serendipitous experiences where she would run into Raphael, and then it was Raphael of Brooklyn, like this Saint Raphael of Brooklyn, and she began to sort of realize who he was and get to know him a little bit. And for one story, for example, she was wheelchair bound. She couldn't drive. She lived about 45 minutes away from the church, and somebody at church just felt for her one day and said, hey, I'm going to come pick you up. You want to go to Mass tonight? We have Mass tonight, and I'll come pick you up. And so she said, okay. So they went down and picked her up and brought her up to Mass. Well, it was the feast of Saint Raphael. Just, she didn't know that. So that kind of stuff was happening, all these experiences. She was preparing to be chrismated, and she didn't know like whose name she should take, who her patron should take, but she sort of suspected that maybe God was trying to tell her something like maybe you need to choose Saint Raphael. But she did not like this idea. She was like, no way, I am not taking a man's name, and I don't even know who this is, and he doesn't resonate with me. What does he have to do, with me in my life? But she really couldn't get away from it. And the name just kept coming up. So she was kind of being hounded, quite frankly. I mean, he chose her, This is Saint Raphael choosing her without a shadow of a doubt. So she's still resistant. She's fighting this. Then the Metropolitan comes for a visit to St. Patrick's. And we have the service and everything. And afterwards, he's standing up to give a blessing. Everybody comes up to kiss the cross, and he hands them something. And she goes up, she kisses the cross, and he hands her something. It's a little icon of St. Raphael. And she's like, all right. Maybe she's starting to weaken, right, under the pressure. And so she finally comes to me. She never even asked me during all of this, like what I thought. She probably didn't want to know what I thought because she was really being resistant. She finally comes to me and tells me all this. And she says, well, what do you think, Father? And I didn't say, duh, okay? I didn't say that. I just said, it seems to me like you're being pursued here, and I'm not sure what kind of choice you have in the matter. And so she said, okay, I'm going to take his name. Well, this young lady is now, soon after, she's bounded out of her wheelchair. She is back to normal life. She's married and is doing great. But this is just an example of how the saints come to us and get involved in our lives. And it's a really powerful and beautiful thing. So
that's an amazing story.
Yeah, it's a great story. Another story, which is secondhand, this was told to me by Father Anthony, who you know quite well. And he was the camp director at the time. So this is his, he related this to me, and he experienced this himself. And this was a long time ago, so if I get a couple details wrong, I think but it's generally correct. There was a young person at the camp, and I believe they were going through a little bit of a difficult time in their life, and I think they were pretty young. And they were there at the camp, and they came to Father Anthony, and they said, I saw this I saw this man in the woods. And Father Anthony was, immediately concerned, like who's lurking around in the woods. And he interviewed the kid, and he's like, what did he look like? What did you see? He was very worried about this. And the kid said, well, he was in a black robes and a funny hat. And he had a stick, and he had something around his chest. These, like the kid didn't know what they were, but the icons of Mother of God. And Father Anthony's like, that doesn't make any sense. There are no bishops on the property. Absolutely no bishops on the property. And even if there were, why would a bishop be lurking around in the woods? So the man had either said something to the kid or waved at him, but he acknowledged him somehow. I don't remember. So Father Anthony didn't know what to do with this. So he just kind of, well, I don't know. So there's a museum there, a really nice museum at Antiochian Village. And in the museum, they have some of Father Raphael, Saint Raphael's things. They have his staff. They have a portrait, a picture of him, not just an icon, but also a photograph, and various things of his. So they were giving a tour to the kids in the museum, and Father Anthony just happened to be with this same kid as they were walking through, and they passed Saint Raphael's photograph, and the kid just blurts out all of a sudden, "That's him! That's the guy I saw in the woods!" So Father Anthony was just like, this is crazy. So it's just another story of like how he came to this child who maybe needed something, like he needed some comfort or he needed some assurance. And that was a beautiful thing. Last story, which just happened last week. We had our clergy symposium for the Antiochian Archdiocese at the village. And there were, I don't know, 300 priests or something there, but it was a big group. And we had a great privilege of being able to offer a Western Rite Vespers on, I think it was Thursday night or Wednesday night. I can't remember, but Wednesday or Thursday. And that was Wednesday, I think. At any rate, so some of the choir from St. Patrick's came up to help us sing the service. There was about 7 or 8 of them. And we had Vespers, and it was very beautiful and wonderful and everything. And I didn't even think about this, but the St. Raphael's skull and his jawbone were on the altar behind the iconostasis in the chapel. They were supposed to be somewhere else, but they hadn't quite had the reliquary prepared, so they left them there. And the choir, they saw, I didn't think to tell them, but they saw the relics kind of over the royal doors. And they're all huddled around. They're not allowed to go back there, but they're all kind of peering over, and they're like weeping, like they're crying. And some of these people had a real strong connection with the woman I told you about. And they had a real devotion to St. Raphael because of that experience in our church. And they're over there whispering and pointing, and a couple of them are kind of like getting teary-eyed. And I looked and saw what they were looking at. And once again, Father Anthony, he happened to be standing there. And I said, Father, would you bring those out so they can venerate them? So he very kindly did. He went and brought them out and put them on a table out front where they could venerate them. And they all just went and genuflected and kissed the relics and venerated them. And they were just so moved. They were so touched and affected by being able to do that, because they had love for St. Raphael. And then being able to experience this was really special for them. So those are just a few stories, kind of, personal stories of St. Raphael.
Yeah, that's amazing. This is not just a history lesson, and it's not just miracles happening in the early church, but there's a continuing, the saints are still with us. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's what matters, right? I mean, I want to try and convey that, try and share that with people, not just, like you say, give a history lesson. That's important too, but this is the presence of God alive with us through His saints, and that's so important. And some people might be wondering, what's the big deal? Why do we venerate relics? Why are these relics important to us? And they're looking for some maybe theological, defense, some apologia. And you could do that. You can give a theological defense and rationale for it. You can give a scriptural defense and rationale for it. But I would start off by answering the question for a very simple reason, but profound. Our veneration and respect for the relics of the saints in our lives has to do with love,
Hmm.
pure and simple. It's really about love, and it's about power. These two things, love and power. And our regard for one another, my regard for you, you for me, our love for one another, both in life and death, not just for the living, but also for those who have died and gone on to be members of the Church Triumphant. This regard, this is the manifestation, the expression of our love for Christ. I mean, love God, love your neighbor. The whole law is summed up in this. And the sort of veneration of relics is part of a manifestation of that. It's sort of how one way that it flows out of us. I mean, you come home, you see your wife, you give her a kiss at the end of the day. You give her a hug. You give expressions of your feelings of love for people. And I think venerating relics is one way that we sort of express this, and also recognize that we are all one in Christ. And who is our neighbor, right? I mean, it's not just the guy living next door. It's not just the person in the pew next to us. All mankind is our neighbor, but especially, and the Bible teaches us this, especially those who are of the household of faith. There is a special bond we have with our Christian brothers and sisters. And Christ teaches us on the eve of his betrayal, he teaches us that it is actually our love for one another that manifests our love for God. You can't love God and not love your brother. And we have an indelible relationship with one another. I mean, it's forged in the fire of the Holy Spirit. It is bonded by the blood of Christ. And this is at the very core of what we understand that makes us a Christian. This relationship we have with all the saints, not just the saints militant, those here still on earth in the body, but also with the saints triumphant who we can no longer see. They're not dead. They're in a different state. They are not dead. They're alive.
Hmm.
And these bones. So that's the love part, but there's a power part too that goes right along with it. I mean, we know that these bones shall live. Right? We know that they shall live. We know that Christ came and he took our flesh and he took our bone and he sanctified it. He made it holy. He made it a partaker of his divine nature when he assumed it to himself. He joined himself to us in this indelible way. And we also venerate these relics because we're not Gnostic. That's why. Because Christ is risen. All will be well. Christ is risen. We're not Gnostics. And we proclaim, I mean, at the root of our faith, the proclamation of the gospel and of our faith, we believe in the incarnational reality of our redemption. It's revealed in his body. It's revealed in the body of the God-man who walked on the streets of Galilee. If he was here in the flesh before us, we would worship him in his flesh. We're not just worshiping his divinity, we're worshiping the person of Jesus Christ, who is consubstantial with us in our humanity. The whole person we worship, right? Not just the divinity, but the whole person. And we understand that. We eat his body and blood, or we have no part with him. And we also sort of manifest this love through our love for the saints who've been glorified. So, I mean, this is our faith at the very root of it. And this really is the scandal of the gospel. I mean, this proclamation, this belief that we have that God became man and sanctified creation and joined it to himself, this really scandalizes all the other great theistic religions in the world. This is what sets us apart, makes us different. This is why they think, we're either cannibals or morons or whatever they think about us. But this is what makes us, in their eyes, to be a great scandal. So, this is another reason, and this is kind of one of my little soapboxes. This is another reason why we don't burn their bodies, right? We don't burn the bodies of human beings. Gnostic pagans burn the body, their bodies. We don't burn human bodies for the very reason of this, because it would show, it would not be proper, it would not be appropriate, because of the incarnation, because of the resurrection, and because of God's sanctifying of our world and creation and our bodies. So this is how we bear witness to our faith in the sanctity of creation, by showing this due respect, by not cremating. And my bishop, years ago, I think he got wind of maybe some nominal Orthodox. They weren't really, they weren't going to church or practicing their faith that much. But when it came time for a funeral, of course, they wanted to have an Orthodox funeral. We know how that goes. So, but somebody had gotten cremated, right? And so they weren't really keeping the faith. And the bishop sent out a notice and said, no, no, you cannot be cremated. And it was really a firm directive. So, God bears witness, as we said, that these relics are special, in that there are miracles surrounding them. I mean, there's, like I said, there were skin still on his bones. There are times when the bodies of saints are incorrupt; they don't decay. There are many instances where these relics emit a tremendous fragrance, or sometimes they stream oil like a myrrh. And there are cases where it literally has to be collected. There's so much myrrh coming out of these bones. In the same chapel at Antiochian Village, I was venerating the relics of Saint Moses the Black, which is very old. And the smell, that when they opened the box and you went up to it, the sweet fragrance was so powerful. I mean, it wasn't like you had to try and imagine it. Mm-hmm. It was so powerful it almost knocked you over. Like I was really in shock by that, mm-hmm. how powerful it was. So God does these things. But just to, I think, sort of sum up this love and power kind of thing, these two primary reasons why we practice the communion of the saints, and we do this through celebrating their feast days. We visit their shrines in pilgrimage. We ask for their intercession through prayer, and we venerate their relics. Why do we do this? That's the question. First, it's a manifestation of love. It's a manifestation of love for our union with God and his whole church. As Augustine said, totus Christus, head and body. Can't separate the head from the body. It has to be the whole Christ. The second reason is that our faith that God has redeemed and sanctified creation through the incarnation and through the resurrection. So it's love and power. And these things are not optional. It's not like somebody can say, well, I like everything else you guys do. Can I sort of leave that? I don't like Brussels sprouts. I don't get those on the cafeteria line. And maybe could I leave this on the cafeteria line of stuff? The answer is no, you can't. So you can come to Orthodoxy and you can say, I don't get it. It's confusing to me. I'm struggling with it, but I trust the church. I trust Holy Tradition. I trust the faith as it's been handed down. And so I receive it and I accept it. God help me to understand it. You can do that. That's fine. And a lot of people do have to kind of do that at first.
Yeah, you kind of have to brew in it and let it sort of sink into your own bones, right?
Yeah. But yeah, you can't say, you can't just dismiss it because it really is at the heart of what it means to be a Christian, is the communion of saints, which is our communion with God, or an integral part of our communion with God.
Right.
And it also is a testimony to our faith in the power of the resurrection and the sanctity of creation. So, I mean, it goes to the very heart of everything we believe.
That's right. Yeah. Very good summary on why relic veneration. I encourage people, many of the points that you made, you can find in St. John Chrysostom's homily or eulogy on St. Ignatius of Antioch, which I've got linked in this interview. I've got a little article that I wrote, and then I reference his homily. So you can go in there and just read his whole homily. It's actually not that long.
Yeah.
And he makes all the exact same points that you just made.
Oh, does he?
Yeah,
So I
he
haven't
really
read it.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's loaded. It's loaded because, well, number one, I have a deep devotion to Saint Ignatius of Antioch. I fell in love with his letters back in 2000, probably 5 or 6. But I stumbled upon Chrysostom's homily about him. Of course, St. John Chrysostom's from Antioch, and he's
Hmm.
talking about when, you know, 300 years before, when Ignatius is killed, son of the disciples, he's killed, and he's killed in Rome, martyred in Rome, but he's brought back to Antioch. And Chrysostom, of course, the golden mouth preacher, is just using such flowery language for his victory and coming home with a crown and all these sorts of things. But he makes a few points. He says, well, number one, that his own death and his own body and relics inspire courage and
Hmm.
faithfulness to Christ in us.
Yeah.
So there's just that that's present. Also, he says that there is a spiritual grace that is operating in not just the remains of the saints, but also uh, their shrines. And so he'll
Yeah.
talk about there being the energizing Holy Spirit
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
in the shrines itself, and that people have experienced the power of the Holy Spirit and miracles happening
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
these. And then he also talks about the Old Testament, how if someone fell on the bones of Elisha and was
Hmm.
healed, how much
Right.
more in the new covenant, where the Holy Spirit is out, just pouring out even more grace,
Yeah.
will we experience that same phenomenon? So it's a beautiful homily. Everyone should read it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's good stuff.
Yeah. We believe in the concrete, tangible, you know, presence of grace in creation.
Right.
I mean, we're part of creation. We receive God's divine energies, right, through the medium of our own selves.
Hmm.
Like they're passing into us. We're experiencing them through our own selves, which is part of the created order.
Right.
And of course, we know through the sacraments, water, oil, and most of all, the bread and wine, which become the very body and blood of Christ. So this is absolutely fundamental to our faith. You
Hmm.
know, I don't know if we have time. I actually had a remarkable experience in England a few weeks ago.
Yeah, go ahead and
Uh,
share. That'd be great.
that actually fits beautifully with this whole discussion. So I took my son, my only son. He has 5 older sisters, but the Crown Prince, my youngest, my son. I took him to England for 2 weeks because he's going off to university, and we wanted to spend some time together. And while we were there, we were visiting all the, we were visiting lots of churches and everything. But we were at Westminster Abbey, and it was a remarkable place. And we were enjoying our visit, and it's stunning, really. Uh, but, and I don't want to offend anyone, but at the same time of enjoying it and how remarkable it was, there was a sense of kind of a bit of emptiness there in terms of feeling the presence of God or feeling, it's got a little bit more of a feeling of a museum. Um, despite every half an hour, 30, 40 minutes, a woman priest would get on the loudspeaker and say a prayer, and begin the prayer by saying this isn't a museum but a church. I'll have to be honest, that didn't really help me at all feel the presence of God. But anyway, so we're walking around, and I was a little sad by that feeling, and so I was feeling kind of a strong emptiness. Um, and I'm walking behind the high altar. In these churches, these Gothic churches, there's often be chapels and other altars behind the high altars, the way they're constructed. And so I'm walking behind the high altar, and St. Edward the Confessor's shrine is there, and he's buried there. And I knew this, but I wasn't really thinking too much about it. You can't go up there because they cordon it off. So I'm walking by, and I'm feeling a little sad, and I stepped into this bubble of like holiness, of grace. I mean, it completely stopped me in my tracks. I can't even tell you, it was like bam. I stopped, dead stop, right next to his shrine. You could see it. You could barely see it through some columns. You couldn't see it very well. And I thought, what is going on? This is odd. And I just felt the presence of God. And it was so acute because of the feeling of a bit of emptiness before. And just waves of this going over me. I started to tremble a little bit. I started to kind of get teary eyed. And there were thousands of people around, and I just couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I just stood there for like 15, 20 minutes. And it was a remarkable experience. Well, I finally moved on, and there was an announcement made that they were going to do a little service in there. So I ran back and I was able to get in, and only like 10 people bothered to even go in there. And the same lady priest was doing the service, and so I stood right next to her, and waited till they were done, and then they all left, and I asked if I could stay, and she said yes, and she was real nice, and so I stayed and prayed there for a long time. But the grace and the presence of God there next to the shrine of St. Edward was just palpable. So to finish this story, there's an important part too that really sort of seals the deal, I guess. There's a punchline. It wasn't just that. So my son and I ended up going up to Lindisfarne, which is where, of course, this is like the holy Mount Athos of England. And St. Aidan from Iona had founded the monastery there in Lindisfarne. And then St. Cuthbert, who had seen St. Aidan's soul being taken to heaven, ended up going there. And he became really the most famous saint in all of England, is St. Cuthbert. And he was there in Lindisfarne. And we're talking like 7th century. It's a long time ago. That's actually where the Vikings landed first in Western Europe. It's a remarkable place, and we were able to spend the night, and it was really a treat to go. Well, so we're in the abbey, and of course, all these abbeys, Henry VIII destroyed 800 abbeys and houses, monastic houses and stuff within 4 years. It's unbelievable what he did. But one of the things he wanted to do in all of this, he wanted to basically sort of cut off the power of the Catholic Church, so that he could sort of release himself, sever that, so that he could, leave and do his thing. And part of severing that was to essentially break their power. I'm going to use the word magic here in a Tolkien sense. Okay, you understand. The enchantment, the magic of the church. He had to disembowel the church of its magic in order for him to work his program. And because that was the power of the church, it was through the clerics and the sacraments. And so to sever their authority, he had to sever their authority and the sacraments. And he went around and desecrated tombs, he desecrated shrines and relics. There were statues of the saints on all these buildings. He'd rip them out, destroy them, break their heads off. We saw a sarcophagus with the saints all around. He didn't destroy everything, but almost everything. The stuff he didn't destroy, he marred and mutilated. All the heads were broken off. So this was his program. Anyway, we're there in the abbey. There's no roof because he tore all the roofs off, took the glass out, and let them just decay. But there's still a lot of like ruins of these abbeys all over England. And at Lindisfarne, this was the ancient abbey. We go in, and it's a beautiful day. There's not very many people around. My son walked off somewhere else. And I just felt like, I don't know how to explain it, but I just kind of felt like drawn up to a certain area. It was almost like I had Irene's thread in my hand, and I was just sort of like, following it along. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm not trying to be spiritual. I'm just walking around, looking around, but I just felt pulled. So I'm in the north aisle. There were still the columns with the arches on the north side. I'm walking east towards where the high altar would be, and I get to the last arch, the last opening, and again, the exact same feeling that I had in Westminster Abbey when I crossed in front of St. Edward's tomb. I felt it like that. I wasn't trying to project. I wasn't, and I was just stopped in my tracks. And I stood there. There was nobody around. And I just felt like the presence of God. It was so powerful. And I'm sitting there. I said out loud, I was so excited. I said, something happened here, right here, something special. I mean, I'll never know what it was, right? I'm thinking, I'm never going to know what happened here. But I know something happened in this spot, right where I'm standing. And I stood there for 15 minutes. I didn't want to move. I was just in such a peaceful, sweet spot. So eventually I thought, well, I need to finish looking around. So there was a big column right on my left. I took 2 steps on the other side of the column, and there was a plaque that said, this is where St. Cuthbert was buried. right? So so that was neat. That was wonderful, right? Um, well, two things. One, St. Cuthbert's not even there anymore. His body's been moved to Durham Cathedral. We went down there and had the same experience down there, by the way, but I don't want to lengthen the story any further. But he's not even there. We're talking about like residual holiness from where he was buried. And first of all, and second of all, it absolutely confirmed for me, and there were about four other experiences I won't go into on this trip. It absolutely confirmed for me that what I experienced down at Westminster Abbey with St. Edward's tomb, I wasn't projecting, like I wasn't just making that up. That really happened because it happened again. And in this case, I didn't even know, like, you know, that's where he was. And so anyways, just wonderful things that God does for us. I mean, if we're open to them and if we love the saints and we just open ourselves up to these things, God really, I think, enjoys giving us these delightful, encouraging, comforting experiences. People might say, why? Like, why would God do that? Well, that's kind of a utilitarian question, and we're not utilitarians. Like, God didn't create you to crush rocks in his quarry. Like, we want to know, why do we exist? He didn't create you to crush rock, to do something for him. He doesn't need you. He made you for one reason. And this is the thing, I can't wrap my mind around this. I'm trying my whole life long. I'm trying to embrace this idea. He made you to experience the fullness of joy in him. That's why you exist. No other reason. To delight in him, to experience joy, to be filled with joy. So why would God give me this experience, of sensing this presence and then having this wonderful experience? For no other reason than to just be able to delight in him, to be comforted. I mean, why did Saint Seraphim levitate 6 inches off the ground when he prayed? Which he did, by the way. Like, why? There's no reason. Just for fun. Because it's awesome. I mean, God wants us to experience him in these ways. And, obviously in this life, there's a lot of suffering and trial and testing and proving. So it's not just, it's not all peaches and cream all the time. But he does give us these little experiences along the way to encourage us, kind of woo us further, come on, there's more.
Yeah.
And, and in the life to come in the eternal kingdom, we'll really taste all of this. We'll see clearly, and we'll be like him because we see him as he is. And, we'll experience the fullness of this joy that we get little snippets of in this life. So,
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, when you read the book of Judges or parts of the Old Testament, it looks kind of like dark and you're just kind of slogging around along, and then there's these big golden moments where
yeah,
God just kind of gives you a
yeah,
waterfall of grace. And I like your definition where it's like we don't have to figure out why he does it this way. He just does.
yeah,
And it fires up our engines for him,
yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for indulging me with that story. It's fun. It's fun to relive it, by telling it. So,
Well, it's fun tying in the English saints into the interview because you have Saint Raphael who's jumping around the world and then making it to America, and then you're hopping over to England, and then you also happen to be a part of a church, Saint Patrick's Church. That's of course, Saint Patrick is from England, Ireland, but also you're a part of the Western Rite within Orthodoxy, and so I wanted to kind of finish the interview talking, just kind of touching on that because how do you really view the Western Rite and preserving even the kind of the Benedictine spirituality, and you used the word mass earlier, which might
yeah,
confuse some of our listeners because
sure.
that's what you use for the Divine Liturgy in the West. And so, how do you see St. Patrick's, the Western Rite, fitting in even to what Saint Raphael was doing
Yeah.
when he was traveling across the United States?
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to ask ourselves, what does Orthodox mean, and what is the Orthodox Church? So um, by that nomenclature that we use, we actually mean that the Orthodox Church is the visible, concrete, church that we refer to in the Creed. It is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and that is visible and concrete in her apostolic succession, her sacraments, her theology and her way of life. That's what we mean by the Eastern Orthodox Church. But that language that's come about, the way we describe her as the Eastern Orthodox Church, has, I think, probably created a little confusion, that one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church is necessarily Eastern. These are the accidents of history, how things have sort of panned out over history. That's the title that people use to describe the Orthodox Church. But I think that the Western Rite serves a tremendous, role, or can have a tremendous role and purpose in manifesting, bearing witness to, and manifesting. I think that word manifesting is very important because it's not just didactic. We're actually living it. We're manifesting it through the rites, the prayers, the language, the sacraments, the patrimony of the Latin and Western fathers, the Celtic saints. All of the whole Western tradition, which is Orthodox, is being returned or restored to a living experience of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the reason this is so important is because if the Eastern Orthodox Church is truly, and our name actually is the Catholic Orthodox Church, okay, technically speaking. So, but if the Eastern Orthodox Church is, as we believe, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, then it is critically important that she manifest her Catholicity. And that is a part of the mission of restoring the Western Rite to the Eastern Orthodox Church as a way of manifesting and bearing witness to her Catholicity, which includes the Western tradition, the Western patrimony, the liturgy and the prayers that made the great saints of the West, Ambrose and Jerome and Benedict and Patrick and Gregory and all the rest, Cuthbert. So they knew a certain kind of liturgical culture, a liturgical ethos, a liturgical way of describing and interacting with the great mystery of our redemption in Christ. And it's distinct from the Eastern way. There's not just one culture of Christianity. And Christopher Dawson really is the guy. I mean, he's the man, really. We need to rediscover him. But he really blew this wide open and really showed that there are cultures. There are cultures, and these are not mutually exclusive. They're different manifestations, different ways in which holy tradition is expressed in different times and place to manifest the fullness of Catholicity. And so I think it's critically important for the Eastern Orthodox Church to re-engage and bring back into living experience this Western patrimony and tradition. And that's really, I think, the primary function or reason for the Western Rite. Along with that, of course, also is that the Eastern Orthodox Church has come into Western lands with a big splash, and a lot of Westerners are become aware of Orthodoxy, Holy Orthodoxy, and they're like, wow, this church has really maintained the purity of the early church and the patristic fathers and whatnot. And I think most people, even who aren't Orthodox, probably agree with that. But sometimes they find it difficult to enter into Orthodoxy because of the cultural differences and language and the Easternness of it. Not everybody has a difficult time, but I think many probably do. So this also becomes an opportunity, along with bearing witness to our Catholicity, or alongside of that, in addition to that, of fulfilling a mission to sort of like throwing the door open, like a door that they can walk through. It sort of removes that stumbling block and enables them to enter the church without feeling like they have to sort of adopt a foreign culture or even liturgical life and culture. And there's a lot more to be said about that kind of thing. But I think that's kind of what I would say. I was going to give the Cliff Notes version. Why we're here and what we're all about, and why the bishops and holy synods of Moscow and Constantinople and Antioch have all affirmed, by the way, and saints and synods and bishops and metropolitans have all affirmed that this is a wise and good and necessary thing for Eastern Orthodoxy to re-engage and bring back into her lived experience the Western patrimony. And I think, one of the great eminent theologians of the 20th century, Father George Florovsky, he talked about a patristic synthesis. And this is also included very much in what he was trying to communicate in that vision of a patristic synthesis, was restoring the Latin patrimony to a lived experience and understanding within Eastern Orthodoxy, and how critical that is for Orthodoxy. I have a little metaphor for like this, and it's I talk about seeing with both eyes, and you can have a patch over one eye, and I can see you just fine. I mean, I can see you in all the detail. You're not blurry to me. I see you clearly, but when I remove the patch, I see you with more depth. It does improve my vision to see with both eyes. And I think the Eastern Orthodox Church needs that eye of the Western Fathers to see with more depth. And because the mystery of salvation is grand and inscrutable. And it's the same reason we need four Gospels. We don't just have one Gospel, we have four Gospels. And the way that the Fathers, the way the West expressed herself liturgically in her devotional life is in a different milieu. It's a different culture. It's distinct from the East. And when you put these things together, they're not contradictory. They're not mutually exclusive. They're complementary. And as Orthodox, we make a big deal about saying how we're not reductionists. We're more is more for us. So we want it all. We want it all. We want the whole tradition. We want everything that it means, all the riches of it, and that's available to us. We just have to overcome our fears, I think, and go after it. It belongs to us. So anyway, that's my short answer.
Yeah, and I've had the joy of visiting, St. Patrick's Church a few times. Wonderful experience, and there's also a documentary online called it's Lady Minister, the Benedictine Orthodox monastery
Yeah,
out in Colorado, which you show up in a little bit,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I would encourage people to check that out as well. It made me think of this because you were talking about the monasteries being destroyed throughout England,
yeah.
and then it made me, oh yeah, Benedictine monastery out in Colorado. Is there
Yeah.
anything you'd like to say about that monastery or the role of monasteries in the Western Rite as well?
Yeah, I mean, we ironically, I think our metropolitan is very interested in seeing the Antiochian archdiocese develop more monasteries in this country. We haven't had a lot, right? And for a long time. So I think that's his heart. And I think we're going to be seeing, the beginnings of more monasteries planted. But the irony is, I mean, to my knowledge, there might be one other or something. I think the only monastery the Antiochian Archdiocese has right now, and I could be mistaken, maybe there's one other, but is actually a Western Rite Benedictine monastery, which is pretty remarkable, actually. And so that's an extraordinary thing. And people, they have oblates. Anybody can be an oblate. You can contact them, Lady Minister, on their website. But a lot of the oblates, they have hundreds of oblates, and many, many oblates are Eastern Rite Orthodox people. Eastern Rite clerics, priests are oblates, and they enjoy, bringing that into their spiritual life and experience, And I know a lot of Eastern Orthodox folks who pray the Benedictine office, for example. And it's important for them to talk to their priest about it first, their prayer rule and all. But we've invested at St. Patrick's a tremendous amount of resources and energy into reviving the Benedictine office for parish use. And so we're very excited about that. I really believe that could create a real cultural shift in America if people could embrace this and start making it a regular part of their life, really connect them with Saint Benedict in the West, and it keys in with the Mass and our calendar in a beautiful, profound way. So it builds tremendous stability in somebody's life to pray the daily office, and the Benedictine office is actually doable, right? So it's reasonable. I mean, you don't have to pray all 8 hours, but as a lay person, you can pray 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever, and it really creates an incredible amount of stability in one's life. One of the vows of the Benedictines, which is unusual for the monastic tradition, an additional vow that is unique to the Benedictines, a vow of stability. So when they went and moved into a Benedictine monastery house, they were vowing to stay there permanently for life, unless, of course, the bishop or somebody, the abbot, decided they needed to move. But they were taking a vow of stability, and I think that this vow of stability, this sense of stability, is absolutely critical for us in our day and age, and especially as Orthodox Christians. We need to let God plant us in a community, and God does move us, of course, but unless He moves us, and if He moves us, great, fine. But otherwise, we need to hunker down, plant roots, be stable, and find Christ where we are, right in the mundane, in the banal. We need to find Christ in the ordinary. That's how you're going to become holy. That's how you're going to become holy. And Benedict was really strict about this. Oh my goodness. He excoriated these monks. They had a big problem with monks running around, from place to place. They heard about something happening over here, and they run over here, and they run over there. Oh, he had some pretty tough things to say about this. So I think the Benedictine spirituality, and St. Benedict's the father of Western monasticism, is really powerful and really in great need in our society and culture today. And to my knowledge, the Benedictine office, the oldest, most ancient Orthodox divine office in extant use.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, thank you, Father Patrick, for all that gold. Love hearing about all those things, and thank you for bringing up all of our wonderful saints, but particularly running us through Saint Raphael of Brooklyn, your experience of his translation of the Relics, and then also all those amazing stories about his life or after his life, people experiencing him in wild ways.
Yeah,
and pretty cool. I hope our listeners are very encouraged by that. If you want to learn more about St. Patrick's, the Western Rite, you can go to orthodoxwest.com or .org.
orthodoxwest.com.
Yeah, and then you can go to St. Patrick's. I've got all these links that you can follow along. And also, Father Patrick is showing up on Barrel Age Faith with his homilies once a week, and I hope you enjoy them. They're a nice, 10-minute homily there of some wisdom that I think I wanted to help share throughout the world, or whoever's listening, with what's going on there. So I appreciate you making those available as well.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for posting.
Well, thank you guys for listening. You have an amazing Friday. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.